right, there are sermon notes inside of your bulletin, and I would encourage you to take those out and follow along. There are scriptures that I hope that you will, at the top of that you'll take a little bit of time each day this week. I don't know about you, but for me, it's actually harder to have devotionals during holidays than it is during the normal work week, just because, like, I work. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. When y'all work during the week, but because routines are off, schedules are off, and so one of the things that I hope you'll see with this, maybe take that and mark off the passage that you read your chapter on Monday and you read your chapter on Tuesday. I really think that we do this and the expectations become more realistic for what Christmas is. It reminds us of what Christmas is about. The flip side of that is if we don't do this, we can build everything up to Christmas morning, and all of a sudden it can be a huge disappointment because we've forgotten what it's about. So again, for myself, on the top of this list, spend a little time with the Lord every single day this week. Remember what all this is about. Of course, the point of the sermon today and the sermon series has been to, both for you and for me, to remind myself of what all this is about, because as we're going to talk about through the course of today's message, without Christ, we can't do anything worth doing. We just can't. And we think we can, but one of the big problems we have in life is that what we believe to be true and what is actually true are not in alignment. What we think, which is that we can, in our own way and with our own recipe, we can become successful people with successful families, and somehow our children are going to be, full of peace and love and joy and great models for society with ethics and morals and all this stuff. But look, without God and without Christ, it's not going to happen. We can't make this stuff up. We think we can, and we believe we can. But here we go yet again. Just because you believe something, it doesn't make it true. It just doesn't. And so one of the big challenges in life for all of us, starting with me, because I'm up here representing God, trying to give y'all truth, and sometimes I'm like, well, that was wrong. I mean, one example, I started Advent a week early this year. And one of our church members got into an argument with someone else, a friend, saying, no, Advent started the week after Thanksgiving because my pastor lit the candle. Totally trusting that what I was saying was true. And then he came to me the next week and says, so you're saying it wasn't? And I'm like, he's like, oh, you just embarrassed me. I trusted you. And I'm like, I've told you, don't ever trust. Use your brain when you come into this place. Yeah. But, it's the idea that we believe stuff and we're blinded to the real truth. And we do this everywhere. And it starts when we're young, because you grow up and, what do? You trust your parents. Never thinking that your parents are just as much a mess as everybody else. And they pass all this to you, and you kind of think, well, this is the way it is. And then you get older and you realize, oh, my parents, and that's when, as youth, we struggle and say, well, my parents are stupid. I know better than my parents. And your parents say to you, I'm not near as stupid as you think. In a couple of years, you're going to realize it, which is kind of true. You come back around to it and you realize, oh, I didn't know all that I thought I did. And the older you get, provided you are growing with humility, growing old with humility, the older you get, the more you realize you don't know. And that's the real truth. We are so blind to so many things. And our society teaches and preaches. We go to these universities where all of the professors say they know everything and they got all the answers, or, your friends have all the answers. If you ever need advice, you don't need to look far, do you? Everybody will tell you how to live your life, how to fix your marriage, how to be successful. But underneath it, they don't know. They don't know any better than you do. They're just as blind as you are. So the Christmas story is God, and just think about, it's hard to grasp the size of the cosmos. It just is, but I like to talk about it in scientific terms. But the God who created not just you and me, because we can understand that. The God who created the planet, we can kind of understand that. But you think about how big the cosmos is. More stars in our one galaxy than all the grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth. That's just our more galaxies in the cosmos than stars in our galaxy. It is an infinite amount of knowledge that is incomprehensible. And the God who created all of that stuff, including you and me, said, we're blind. But he wants to help us see. Now understand, when Jesus was born into the world, in John chapter 1, Matthew, Mark, and Luke give us the historical accounts of, the shepherds and the angels and the wise men and the Christmas stories that are traditionally told, which is great, but the meat of the Christmas story is provided by John, which is why if you're a new believer or you haven't read the Bible in a while, I always tell folks, read John first. How many times? Over and over and over again until you can anticipate how each story, each section is going to end, because that's how powerful John is in giving us the meat behind who Jesus was and why he came. And in John chapter 1, if you brought your Bibles, we're going to have yet another Bible story flipping time, which is fine. There are sermon notes. I hope you'll write down things you want to remember, and I hope you'll read those sermon notes over the course of this week. We're going to finish up this study of John. What we've been doing is looking at all the scriptures in John where Jesus calls himself light of the world. And it's remarkable, really, because a lot of times we just think about John chapter 8 where he says, I am the light of the world, but he says it 5 different times. 5 different times in very different contexts. Jesus says, I am light of the world. We're going to look at the 4th one today, and at Christmas Eve tomorrow, we're going to look at the 5th one. But it's all coming under the umbrella of John chapter 1, these first 4 verses, where we are told, in the beginning was God and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was God. And the Word was life, and the Word was light to all the people, to all the world. He's not talking about the trees and the clouds. Light of the world is light to the people of the world. And we get a little bit more of the story, but down in verse 14, we're then told, and the Word was enfleshed and came to live and breathe and walk among us. Now, in this context, we have a lot of I am statements where I am bread of life, and we've talked about how don't let possessions or people become your bread of life. We've got other things like other sayings, I am living water, or I am the way, the truth, and the life, or I am the resurrection and the life, which we'll talk about a little bit today. Lots of I am statements. But in the context of this series and this Christmas season, what I hope in everyone who comes here will just be ponder, how is Jesus light of the world? He says, I am light of the world, and he just doesn't say it once. He doesn't say I'm the resurrection and the life over and over again. He talks about it. He doesn't say I'm bread of life over and over and over again, and yet he says I am light of the world over and over and over and over and over again. I don't think that's a coincidence. And it falls under the umbrella of John chapter 1, where literally we're beginning by seeing that the Word who was God was the life and the light for all the world. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean when Jesus, who was God, who came to live among us, called himself over and over and over again light of the world? Well, the first piece of this is just to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the opposite of light? And darkness. What does it mean when God says to you and me, you walk and live in darkness? You think you can see, but you can't. Should we listen to that statement? Should we take note? Because if we're walking in darkness, and your parents walk in darkness, and your friends walk in darkness, and your spouse walks in darkness apart from Christ, then do you realize we're the blind leading the blind with all this stuff? No wonder we have so many problems in our world. Doesn't it almost feel like the blind are leading the blind? He brought up government and peace. I don't want to get into politics, but he talked about the blind leading the blind. What's the compass that's driving all of that over there? Of course, if it's just each individual representing themselves based off of their basic life experiences, they're going to be a mess. They'll never agree. How could they? There's no common standard. There's no common path. That's just the way it works. And it's the same way it works in our families. The less you have those common ultimate concerns that drive you, which, by the way, it will happen more and more based off when you're using your own standards to determine whatever that is, you will be more in common and more in alignment when you use, God's standards. Because God's standards are not yours, and they're not your spouse's, and they're not your kids. And when you can align with those standards, you are on the right path to success, which looks like what? The things you want anyway. Peace. Isn't that what you really want Tuesday morning? To have at least 24 hours without one single argument with anybody? Joy? In the point of presence, that somebody opens it and they love it so much that the present makes them happy. We know that's not how it works. But every now and then with our kids, it kind of works that way, and it's awesome. Love. Wouldn't it be nice if every single person who you went into their home and they came into your home, or the people who are already in your home, for the next 7 days, everybody would love each other perfectly? Isn't that what we want? Contentment? Freedom from anxiety? Where are we going to get those things? Well, Jesus says, from me, and no one else, and nowhere else. Because only I am light of the world. Only I can shine light, you'll follow this, on your darkness. Only I can provide your ability to see when otherwise you're walking blind. Now, this is a big statement. That the God who created us is saying, without Him, when you go through any given day, without Him being your guide and your compass, your voice, your conscience, whenever you stray from that narrow path, you are literally on your own with complete blinders on, with mud on your eyes, with scales on your eyes, and you're living your life that way. In John 15:5, it's the whole vine and the branches passage. Yeah, we'll turn to this one. Jesus is talking about how we are branches and He's a vine. The reason He says that is because we think we are vine. That's the whole point, is that you're not vine people. Y'all are branches. I am vine. And if you stay connected to me, you can do anything. Now, He doesn't mean you can do anything, does He? He means you can experience all of the things that God wants for you to experience, which if you dig deep and are honest with yourself, you know that's what you're striving for anyway. It's why we work so hard. It's why we try and get all the plaques on the wall and be successful. It's because we, somewhere in the back of our minds, believe if we achieve a certain level of success based off of blind definitions, that it's going to result in what everybody who's also blind is going to tell us we're going to get. And Jesus says, no, it's not true. Because you're not a vine. I am the vine, you are branches. And in John 15:5, here's the big one. Without me, you can't do anything. How many people in the world disagree with that? How many times do you disagree with that? Me too. Believe me, we are in this together, especially today. That's just part of the season. So what do? Well, we have to be exposed to a different reality. And at some point, you have to have faith that that reality is the truth of the reality. You have to have faith, believe that there's a different reality, even though your feelings have not caught up, knowing that one day you follow the different reality, your feelings do catch up. One of the things I'll tell married couples, the few who want to hear what I have to say, and usually I'm like, I don't know if I ought to say anything, but I know this. If you wait to do right until you feel right, you're never going to do right. Feelings catch up to actions. It's just the way it works. You have to live the way God's called you to live. You have to be the way God's called you to be, whether it is in a marriage or with kids or with friendships or as a pastor or whatever. You have to set the standards, which, by the way, we don't set. I should be clear. You have to see that God sets the standards, and then you say, I'm going to live that way even though my feelings are nowhere in the ballpark. Why? Well, that's the faith, because I know only Jesus is light. Only Jesus can show me the way. And without him, I'm blind. So, a few passages. In John 3, verse 9, and this worked out great for me extending Advent an extra Sunday, by the way, because now that I've preached through this, I realize there are 5 I Am Light of the World plus the introductory, so it worked great. So, in our church, the Lord designed me to extend Advent for this season. But anyway, so in John 3:19, 3:19, In John chapter 1, remember, that's the plot, that's the theme. The Word was God, the Word was the life, and the life was the light of the world. Okay? Now we get into the meat of John, and we begin to see different ways that God himself, through the person of Christ, is trying to explain to us what this looks like. And like most things God does, if you think you can get it on the first glance, you've already made the mistake of pride. Wherever God's concerned, you can't get it all. Because the minute you think you got it all, you might as well put yourself on your own altar. So we get lots of perspectives, and the first one is John 3:19, where we hear, the light came into the world, but people love darkness more than the light. And he goes on, which I love this, because he goes on to say, why? Because basically I told them what they're doing is wrong, and they didn't want to hear it. Even though, I think he could have gone, even though they're a mess, and what they're doing is not working. And I'm like, here, you can fix it if you do this. They're like, I don't want to hear it. I got this covered, God. And God's like, I see that. Bingo. If you like that Christmas. Anyway, some of you will know what that meant. If you Christmas vacation. Oh, you finally got it. Okay, yeah. Totally inappropriate from a pastor, I know. So I'll just move right on. Anyway, why do we not want to hear these things from Christ? I mean, you could get as basic as the spiritual disciplines, because I got other things to do than have a daily devotional, really. I don't really want to be in church every Sunday. Come on, every Sunday needs to be a Sabbath. I've got other things to do. 10% of my money? God, seriously, that's a lot of money. I'll come up with my own number, and then I'll give it to you, and let's call it tithing, God. Why? Because we don't want to hear from God that not giving 10% is actually sin and wrong. Don't say that. All of a sudden I'm getting into hellfire and brimstone. Don't say that. Well, what about serving the poor? Yeah, God says if you aren't finding a way to serve the poor, you aren't serving me. Period. We don't want to hear that, especially if you're not serving the poor, do you? Being in community with other believers. It's great if you're in community with other believers. Not so much if you're not. How about witnessing to your faith? Jesus says, go into all the world and spread the gospel, and you make disciples of all the nations. Well, that's great if you're doing it, but if you haven't invited anyone to Christmas Eve, if you haven't talked to anybody about Jesus in the past 12 months, if no one's going to heaven for you, you don't want to hear that, do you? All of a sudden, I've gone from preaching to meddling. It's only meddling if you're not doing what Jesus commands us to do. But let's be clear, that's just the basics. Jesus says you should have forgiven every single person who's ever hurt you in your life, period. It doesn't mean that you don't have healthy boundaries. That's another conversation. But how many of us have forgiven everybody who's hurt us? No, not me. I don't want to hear that. Let's go on to, you need to thank God in all circumstances, including your pain. Well, anything that I just said that you're not doing, you didn't like to hear it, did you? And neither did I. There's something broken within us that when somebody comes to us and says, Brother Thomas, you're a mess and you really need to fix this, the first reaction is, don't you tell me what to do. How dare you point out the little speck in my eye when you got that big old board hanging out of yours? And they're like, whoa, man, I was just saying you had something hanging out your nose, brother. I mean, you're on camera. Everybody sees it, except you. Anyway. So what we do, is Jesus right? And the answer is, of course he's right. So the goal here is not to, beat each other with Bibles. That's not who we are. The goal is for us to have enough humility and awareness to take a step back and say, wherever Jesus raises a standard and we're not living up to it, to say, okay, I'm going to try. Why? Because I believe he's the light of the world. And when I allow the light, right, to guide my life, everything else is going to be better. It doesn't mean all your circumstances are going to come to your liking. It means your ability to manage them and have a healthy perspective throughout them is going to change drastically. And by the way, when your perspective about your circumstances changes, you have changed your circumstances. I can't say it again, it's gone. When your perspective changes about your circumstances have changed because our perspective, to me, our internal perspective, that lens through which we look at everything, whether it be your spouse or your kids or pets or anything, right? That perspective is key to health or ugliness. So, moving on. In John chapter 8, we hit some of these last week. In verse 12, we have this story of the woman caught in adultery. And after the whole thing is said and done, and she's been shamed and humiliated and just horrible, horrible situation, Jesus basically says, I forgive you, go your way and sin no more. And right after that, in front of the whole temple and everybody, he says, I'm light of the world. Point being, she's been living in darkness, and I have offered her light. This is what light looks like. Your life is ruined. You've been shamed and humiliated. You feel like you cannot take another breath. And God says, right, I'm here with you. I'm right here with you. On the ground, in the dirt, with you in your shame and your pain. It's okay. Go your way and do better. That's light of the world, folks. Where have you messed up in the past 12 months? What if God put you up here in front of everyone and told everybody the ugly things you've done and said in the past 12 months? Wouldn't it be nice to know that the God who could do that doesn't do that? He says, I know what you've done, but I love you so much. We can move forward if you'll just try. That's light of the world. The next one in the next chapter. So this is the woman in John chapter 9, verse 5. Jesus heals the blind man. It's real easy to look at that and say, oh, Jesus physically healed a blind man, but we always need to ask, remember it's God, so he didn't do anything by accident. Before he heals the blind man, and Jesus in John verse 5, immediately before he heals the blind man, Jesus says, I am light of the world. You think that he meant by that he was going to physically give sight to the blind guy? Or do you think him physically giving sight to the blind guy and spit? Have you ever wondered why he spit in the ground and made mud and put it on the guy's eyes? Well, it probably meant something deeper than a literal it meant something very deep. The mud represents our pride. The mud represents our blindness. The mud represents all kinds of things, the same type of thing that Paul's scales represented that fell off. when he got his life right with the Lord. And so Jesus heals the blind guy, but remember, before he did, he said, I am light of the world. So we have a physical illustration of a deeper truth that when Jesus comes on the scene and we open our hearts to him, when we say to him, Jesus, heal me, he does. At the end of that pericope, I got to use a smart word at least once, right? In that passage, which is a 2-chapter passage, John 8 and 9, the whole thing is a big bracket. At the end of all that, Jesus' antagonists, the people who didn't believe in him, he said, look, I came so the blind could see, and so those who could see would be blind. And they're like, well, you aren't calling us blind, are you? I actually put in your sermon notes, duh, yeah. So when you read that this week, just remember I rehearsed that hard. Duh. Or if I could have emojied it, that's where Jesus invented this emoji. You can see it on the ancient Greek cave walls, passed down from the Romans, went through the monks and anyway. And then we come to today. Did y'all know Jesus said, I'm light of the world this many times? I actually did. I believe it or not, I've read this a few times in the last 30 years. Not once in seminary have I ever heard or had someone preach on these 5 things, which is bizarre to me because now I'm thinking this is one of the most powerful things I've ever learned. But anyway, it's been fascinating to me. In John chapter 11, verse 9, and we're going to turn to this one because it's amazing. I mean, it's life-changing, really. In John 11, most of us are familiar. If you're not, that's okay. Read it this week. But Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. We get that. Awesome. He comes out with his grave clothes. That's when the zombie movie started. But before he did it, he said something. You see a pattern? Before he did it, he said something. So in chapter 11, he says, okay, the Bible tells us a man, Lazarus, was ill. The village of Mary and her sister Martha, that's where he was from. And this is the same Mary who loved God, loved the Lord so much, she anointed his feet with oil and wiped his feet with her tears and hair. Oh, talk about deep grief. So anyway, they sent word to Jesus, the one whom you love is sick. In verse 4, Jesus heard this, and he says, this illness isn't fatal. It's for the glory of God. We got to think about what does it mean to glorify God. That's for another conversation. But in verse 6, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was. Well, that's mean. He didn't go right away. And after 2 days, he said to his disciples, let's return to Judea. Honestly, it's like he had a point to make before he went. And for those who had the eyes to see, it would be a game changer. So in verse 8, the disciples replied, Rabbi, the Jewish opposition, they want to kill you because you already said you're the light of the world. I mean, you said before Abraham was, I am, and they wanted to kill you then. I mean, have you forgotten this, Jesus? He's like, Jesus answered, here we go. Remember, he's not there. They're away from Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. Just like before he healed the blind man. Aren't there 12 hours in the day? Whoever walks in the day does not or will not stumble because they see the light of the world. But whoever walks in the night does stumble because the light is not in them. And they went to see Lazarus. He was dead. Everybody's crying. Jesus is crying. Real grief. Before Jesus did anything, he said something else. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die. Whew. And then he raised Lazarus from the dead. Where are you most blind? Where is the human race most blind? Huh? Death? Isn't it? We fear death more than anything else. Why? Because we're afraid of what we don't know. If you want to get over your fear, face it. You might not like what you find, but you won't be afraid of it. Fear is the ultimate root cause of anxiety and worry. It's what goes on within us when there's an unknown situation that we do not want to deal with. And we react to it in all kinds of, we lash out and we accuse and we slander and we libel and we point the finger and we do all this horrible stuff that normally we would never do, but we lose all sense of normalcy because we're afraid. It's like, this was funny. Anyway, I've seen a cat in a corner with some dogs, and the dogs were pushing it, and the cat got back like this. The cat literally raised up in the corner and held up his paw, and it's like, rear, rear, and the dogs are like, getting it. And that cat, at one point, just was like, rear, rear, and the dogs are like, ha ha, gotcha. But that's what happens. The fight or flight. That's what fear does. And it's deadly. It's horrible when we mishandle it. So because we're blind to whatever's going to happen. What are we ultimately blind to in this world? I mean, the big one? What happens when we die? What if? Is that fair? So much so our world doesn't want to talk about it. I want to talk about death. We'll deal with that when it happens. Think that one through, but anyway. There's one reason we come to church before it happens. I'm just saying, but anyway. Our ultimate arrogance, our ultimate blindness as human beings is that we somehow think that even though I'm blind to it, even though I'm dark to it, I will just sweep it under the rug and we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to think about it. Boy, that's just stupid. If you know it's coming, and like Billy Graham said, 1 out of 1 people die. Don't you think you ought to be prepared? Now, Jesus knew, God knows, that this is our ultimate blindness. He knows this, and He knows we fear it. He knows that there are parts of this, especially when we lose loved ones. We're just ripped up inside because we can't see. Now, that's the truth, friends. We can't see what happened to them. We can't see where they went. We can't see how God treated them or didn't treat them. It's just a veil, and beyond the veil, it's black. And it's devastating. So God comes into this darkness and blindness that we have regarding that, and He says in John 14, do not be troubled. Do not be afraid. Trust God and trust me, because I am the light for your and their darkness. All good things have to come to an end in this world. They do. Folks, all good things will come to an end in this world. And we have an innate blindness to what happens the second that chapter closes. And our most gut-wrenching pain in life is when the chapter closes and we fear, right, the emptiness on the other side. Jesus is the one, Psalm 23. Even if I walk, say it with me, through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear nothing. Why? Because you're with me. And why does that matter? Because I know you've already been to the other side. And you've told me what to expect. You are light for that darkness. Whenever some of you will struggle this Christmas season, you will. Because there will be people who aren't with you around the table and around the tree. Some of you have had some rough months, maybe years. And a lot of that is because you've lost things that were very valuable to you, and you're grieving. Folks, our grief is blindness. It doesn't mean that we don't miss and that we don't care for, but the moment you can pierce the darkness with the light of Christ that says, I've been to the other side, and for everything that is good in your life, you need to trust me. That God's the one who created that. God's the one who created you. And the real goodness, the real joy, is not meant for this life anyway. It's for the life to come. And I have gone there to prepare a place for you so that when your time comes, I can come and get you and take you so that you and all the other good stuff, right? I'm the resurrection. I'm the life. I'm the light of the world for your darkness. Trust God, Jesus says. Do not be troubled. And trust me. And we'll continue tomorrow evening. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. We're so grateful, so grateful. I pray for everyone here, our loved ones who aren't with us, those who are worshiping online, that we all would know your peace and your strength, your comfort, that we'd be connected to you every second, that your light would fill our souls from the depths of who we are to the tips of our toes and fingertips, that we would be warmed up by you and guided by you, that as we move into Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we might remember what it's all about, and we might experience your abundance, that we might glorify you through our peace, through our love, through our hope, through our joy, with you at the center. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless you. I hope to see you at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. Quick word.
That's right, 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, and if there are a few folk that can hang out after the service, we are going to try and pull a couple extra chairs out and stuff in the back. But if you're new as well, I'm going to hang out up here in the front. Love to shake your hand. And if not, guys, we'll see you tomorrow, Christmas Eve. Have a wonderful night.